Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on something that's, well, pretty misunderstood, but absolutely fascinating: how the Vatican actually makes a saint. So, how does it really happen? Does the Pope just wake up one day and decide? Is it some kind of popular vote? You might think it's a process that's all about faith, but the reality is way more complex, way more meticulous, and honestly, surprisingly modern. And that's really the key takeaway here. The whole point isn't just to celebrate someone's holy life, it's to rigorously verify it. So think of it less like a ceremony and more like a full-blown, evidence-based investigation. Okay, so here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we'll meet the actual investigators. Then we'll walk through the 4 official steps to sainthood. After that, we'll get into the nitty-gritty of how they make sure it's a tough process. And finally, we'll see how this whole system has changed over time.
All right, so first up, who's even in charge of all this? This isn't just some committee they pull together now and then. Nope, it's a permanent, powerful department right inside the Vatican.
And that department is called the Dicastery for the Causes of Saints. It's essentially the Vatican's dedicated investigations unit for sainthood. And get this, it was formally created all the way back in 1588 to centralize and formalize what used to be let's just say, a much looser process. And these folks are busy. I mean, really busy. Right now, they are actively investigating around 1,600 different cases. That's a massive workload, and some of these files have been open for centuries. Okay, so now that we know who does the work, let's get into the how. This isn't just a one-and-done thing. It's a journey, a gradual climb with 4 very distinct and verifiable stages. And this lays out the path perfectly. So it all kicks off at least 5 years after a person's death. That's when a local bishop can open a case, and the candidate is called a servant of God. If Rome looks at all the evidence and says, yep, this person lived a life of heroic virtue, they're upgraded to Venerable. Now, to get to the next step, blessed, you need a miracle, and we'll talk about that in a sec. And finally, to be declared a saint, a second verified miracle is needed. Now, here's where it gets really interesting, especially with the miracles. There's a major exception here. If someone was martyred, killed for their faith, they actually don't need a miracle to become blessed. Their martyrdom is seen as the ultimate proof. But, and this is a big but, they still need one verified miracle, just like everyone else, to make that final leap to saint. So you might be thinking, okay, but how do they make sure this isn't just a rubber stamp? How do they actively look for problems or reasons not to make someone a saint? Well, this is where one of the coolest jobs in the Vatican comes in. It's the promoter of the faith. You've probably heard this person's more famous nickname, the devil's advocate. And their entire job, literally, is to argue against the sainthood candidate. And you don't have to take my word for it. The current guy in the job puts it perfectly. He says he's supposed to be the bad guy in the movie, kind of like a prosecutor. His duty is to poke holes in the story, find every possible objection, and make sure the absolute truth comes out. And that same level of rigor, it applies directly to the miracles. When a claim comes in, and it's almost always a medical cure, it's not just taken on faith. It's handed over to a board of independent, secular medical experts. Their only job is to see if there's any scientific explanation for what happened. If they can explain it, it's not a miracle. Simple as that. Now, this super structured, almost legalistic system, well, it wasn't always this way, not even close. It's actually the product of almost 2,000 years of change and evolution. If you rewind the clock, in the early days of the church, saints were basically made by a popular vote. If the local folks decided you were a saint, you were a saint. But you can imagine the problems that caused. So over the centuries, the process got more and more centralized. First, the Pope had to approve it, then they created that formal department in 1588, and finally, it got a huge modern overhaul in 1983. And those 1983 reforms by Pope John Paul II were a total game changer. They were all about making the process faster and more modern. The waiting period to even start a case was slashed from 50 years down to just 5. The number of miracles needed was cut in half. And that confrontational devil's advocate role was softened into the more investigative promoter of the faith we have today. It was all designed to speed things up. Which really brings us to our final thought here. Why does this ancient institution lean so heavily on what is basically a modern forensic-style investigation? Well, I think this fascinating blend of old-school faith and new-school evidence tells you everything you need to know about how much credibility and verifiable truth matter to them today. It's not just about believing, it's about proving. Like, share and subscribe to Perpetual Help.